Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I want to thank specifically Kale Ellis for the invitation, as well as Nadia. Is Nadia here? I can tell you that she has gone out of her way so many times to try to accommodate us. Thank you so much, Nadia, for your wonderful help and effort. And I want to thank the university for having us and for having this wonderful conference. Needless to say, it is this issue of persecution of minorities is critically important. I have, of course, been listening very carefully to the very distinguished speakers that spoke before us. And I must say that I heard somewhat a little bit too much optimism. And I will have to, I cannot correct what their views or what they've been saying, but I'd like to sort of take a little different take on what's happening in the Middle East. Why I think that the situation is considerably worse that's been expressed, and we should not be thinking so optimistically about the future. I do not, however, want to spell here doomsday. But for us to really deal with persecution of minorities, we have also to read the truth, to see reality as it is. And there's a great deal of illusion about the reality of the Middle East. I just want you to imagine for a moment, just think, for the last 5 years, Assad, with his cohorts like Iran and Russia, been tearing city after city in Damascus. Thousands, nearly 600,000 Syrians have been slaughtered. Among them, over 150,000 children under the age of 15. And the world is watching this with equanimity. I ask the question today, if this is what is happening and doing, for all intent and purposes, very little to stop it, how dare we speak about the future, ending the persecution of minorities in the future? It's not happening. Because we are now in the midst of horror that has been unfolded going back at least to 2003, obviously persecution of minorities, the Christians, go back to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire when nearly 1.5 million Armenians were slaughtered. But I want to leave history for a moment. I just want to go back to 2003. We have a president who set the entire region on fire, followed by another president who hardly made any effort to put out some of these fires. We may well have a president coming who may add the fuel to the fire. I do not know if General sitting next to me, esteemed General, will agree with me. Because you were part of that war, about that process. That was an ill-thought war that has set, as I said, the region on fire. And now we are looking at the turmoil that has been sweeping the Middle East. The question is, are we really in a position to bring back order to that region? Are we really in a position to begin systematically to protect minorities? Where is the international will? Where is the international resolve? Who is going to do the work? It is so easy to say the international community ought to do A, B, C, and D. I want to understand, where is this international community? You have United Nations Security Council, which is morally bankrupt. I have yet to see a single resolution that could save the life of a single Syrian. You have governments in the Middle East and in Europe who are concerned only and only with their own interest. Nobody is looking at our back at the humanity. Where are we? Where are we going? And I have to ask the question today. Certainly, we cannot simply just sit and wait to see for things to happen. We've got to think in realistic terms to bring an end to the slaughter that's taken place in the Middle East, to the probably an ending war between the Sunni and the Shia. You know, we talk about ISIS. I just want you to think in those terms. However number of people that ISIS has killed pale in comparison to what Assad killed of his own people. So if we want really to begin a process of redeeming ourselves, a process where we can in fact begin to mitigate the problem of persecution of minorities, including the Christians, we have to think in terms of the root causes. What are we watching today in the Middle East? We are in the midst of several wars. If we want to begin a process of reconciliation, we've got to make every conceivable effort to end these wars. And of course, this is easier said than done. The international community, the United States, has made supreme effort over the years to try to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it had failed. It failed because it did not have a clear understanding what the conflict is all about. We're thinking about territory. We're thinking about the future of Jerusalem. But there is embedded psychological gap, embedded psychological dimension that the United States, the EU, no one really understood, and therefore were not prepared or ready and willing to deal with it. How are we going to end the Sunni-Shia conflict? How are we going to end that kind of conflict that has been under the surface for more than 1,000 years and has been reignited because of the ill-considered war, the Iraq War? This conflict will continue to reverberate throughout the region, and not a single minority will be spared. What are we going to do with Iran? You have now two countries, one is Shiite, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, which is Sunni, and they're all fighting for regional hegemony. And they will stop short of nothing, because for them it is almost a war of do and die. This is a conflict. We're going to have to see how are we going to deal with it. We've got to bring an end. ISIS will end sometime, sooner or later. But we have to think in terms of what will happen after ISIS physical defeat, say in Iraq and Syria. They have already established cells all over the Middle East, all over Europe. They will continue to terrorize the international community and the Middle East for years, if not decades to come. How do we bring an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? How do we end the occupation? The occupation that is feeding into the frenzy of extremism throughout the region. We've got to bring an end to the occupation. So as long as we are watching this conflict and basically talking about it and analyzing it and trying to project some rosy picture about the future, we are simply making matters considerably worse. And it's time now to start to think of real remedies. Not some illusionary ideas about what can happen. You know, I have a list here of things that can be done, you know, because my task is to suggest to you some remedies, some strategic approach to ending the violence, you know, the persecution against minorities. And I can give you, you know, a whole list. To start with, as I said earlier, ending these conflicts. We're going to have to think in terms of who are the power that can, in fact, exert the kind of influence and have the understanding to be able to deal with these conflicts, to bring an end. Whether it's going to take a year or 2 or 5, but we've got to have a strategy that is going to work in order to bring about an end to these horrifying conflicts that will continue to consume the Middle East and will continue to consume minorities, and the Christians will not be spared necessarily. We have to be engaging in preventive diplomacy. That is, we need to know where are these transgressions are taking place throughout the region. The United States, the European community, those countries that have the means and the ways by which they can influence the region. We must discern and see what can be done in order to prevent atrocities before they happen, not after they have taken place. We have to engage very seriously in monitoring and exposure. You know, it is so sad for the United States, who, as the speaker, I believe his name was Knox, spoke earlier. The United States, the State Department has a specific division. In fact, ambassadors throughout, all American ambassadors have an officer who actually watches and makes sure and look at what all this transgression is taking place against minority and report about it. But when it is not convenient to single out countries that are presumably our allies, we say nothing about Saudi Arabia. We say nothing about Pakistan. We say nothing about these countries that have been committing these atrocities against minorities day in and day out, because it does not serve our political interest. It's time to end that kind of hypocrisy. It's time to call it. It's time to name them and shame them, as it was earlier used, the phrase being used before. We have trades with nearly every country around the world. Why aren't we attaching specific provision to every trade we make with every single country? That if they conduct, if they undertake, if they get involved in any kind of persecution, there will be consequences. There will be consequences. Countries like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like Pakistan, and many others, still benefiting day in from day out from what we, the United States, is doing in terms of trade. Look at the Iran deal. Look, have we even attempted to attach anything to the Iran deal in order to make sure that Iran does not continue its ravage attack against minorities? We have to learn to impose sanctions even on our allies. We have to learn to deal with Israel. If Israel continue its position in connection with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Israel will have to be called to task and things will have to be done. That is, we need to get involved in coercive approach sometimes. Coercive diplomacy is there as a tool. Most of these countries need the United States. Most of these countries, many of them depend on the United States. And so we have to know our position. One thing I have admired President Obama for many things that he's done. He inherited a horrible economy, a fire throughout the Middle East. But in my view, he was naive because he never understood the role of America's leadership in the world, without which we will continue to see more and more chaos. America cannot lead from behind. We cannot afford to do that. Nor am I suggesting to you that we should be sending ground troops every time there is a fire someplace to try to quell it. But I am suggesting to you that if we, the United States, abdicate its global responsibility, there is no one else to come and fill up that space. And we cannot afford to do that. And as long as we don't do that, and as long as our partners in the European community don't do that, well, you can expect the continuation of persecution of minorities, including Christians, from now until doomsday. That's not going to change. But one point that I want to overemphasize: education. Education is the heart for ending future persecution. Education is the heart to mitigate hatred. I just want you to know, many friends of mine, which I admire very much from Palestine, you should look at these books that are being printed and what the children are taught. You should even look at some of the Israeli books, which have not been modified as yet. You do not see Israel map on Palestinian geography books. Nor do you see real acknowledgement of the Palestinian existence as such in many Israeli history books. They do not know one another. 4 generations have been victimized by their own parents and grandparents. How are you going to forge peace between 2 people who do not know one another, when the 2 governments deliberately prevent people-to-people interaction, which is the heart, the soul of mitigating any kind of conflict? People to people. People to people, that is, education in schools, in the street, in the newspaper, in the media, ought to consider this extreme very, very carefully, because unless the new generation learn how to tolerate, how to understand, how to sympathize, how to have compassion, we are not going to see a solution to the Israeli conflict anytime soon. We will not see a solution to the Sunni-Iraqi, Sunni-Shiite war anytime soon. And we're going to continue to basically make these commentaries day in and day out about what's happening, but yet we're hardly lifting a finger to try to correct it in a realistic manner, in a real manner, rather than engage in wishful thinking. I must tell you, every time I watch TV, and I see these kids are pulled out of the rebels, dismembered. Many of them are still alive. Perhaps they would have wished to have died instead. And they grow up perhaps a year or 5 years down the line, and they will ask themselves why the hell they have ever been born. Can we really afford to continue to watch this atrocities taking place? And then talk about ending persecution, when we are sitting on our hands, Muslim killing Muslims, Christian killing Muslim, Muslim killing Christian, Jews killing Muslim. We all receive the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not kill, but then we turn our sword against one another. And thou you shall not use the name of God in vain, but we keep killing in the name of God. That is not acceptable. It is not acceptable by Christianity. It should not be acceptable by Islam, and certainly should not be acceptable by Judaism. This time has come. Time has come to call it as we see it, to wake up and stop engaging in rhetorics that have taken us nowhere. We will continue to see this horrifying malaise that has engulfed us, and we'll continue to make commentary. I am not prepared to continue with my commentaries, because this is another kind of war, a war that we have to wage in order to bring senses, real common sense, to those who can act and must act now. Thank you very much.